How you doing? It's Jared. So, Microtech Socom Elite. This video is not going to be just me entirely gushing about this knife because this knife is basically the perfect example of the difference between fit and finish. And I'll get into that. But this is a badass knife. I freaking love this thing because when generally most people when you hear Microtech, right? When you hear that the company name Microtech, you think of this. Not necessarily you, but I mean, a lot of people, most people are going to think of an Ultratech, the OTF, the double action OTF. This is kind of the quintessential Microtech. This is what most people, a lot of people think of. Then you can get into like the push button automatics. Most people have an association with the push button automatic, just the automatics. Out the front push buttons, things like that. In the Balisong community, a lot of people know them for the Balisongs. They've been coming out with they had the Tachyon 2. This is the Tachyon 3. There's been several models of that. But you don't think about manual action folders. Manual action thumb stud liner lock folders. It's not something that pops into a whole lot of people's heads. They've got a couple of them out there. This is the kind of entry level one you can get. I think it's the Microtech Sigil. This is the Socom Elite, and that really just makes it cool because it has the fact of you can carry a Microtech and still be carrying a manual action folder, because if it's prohibited in your area to actually carry an automatic knife, you can't generally carry a Microtech because the majority of the knives they make are automatics. You know what I mean? You don't have the option to carry something like this, to actually carry the manual action Microtech. This gives you that option. This one here being just straight legal in a lot of states. It does have a 4-inch blade, and that, prohibits it in a lot of areas because it is kind of getting beefy. It is definitely on the larger side. This is not a small knife, and it's definitely in that tactical realm as well. Nobody's going to look at this thing like, oh, it's a gentleman's knife. It's obvious what this thing is built for. It's made for, especially with that blade stock. It's got a 0.19 inch thick 0.19 inch thick blade stock, which is that's like fixed blade stock. I mean, that's honestly getting unnecessary in an aluminum frame folding knife. That's coming up on the border of ridiculous. I love it. I'm definitely a fan of it, but somebody who says that's unnecessary isn't necessarily wrong. But it's got that cool factor to it, and it's definitely strong in the M390, which is an excellent blade steel. I really like this blade shape, that kind of sweeping clip point, very stabby, kind of very sharp clip point there. It's going to penetrate into material. It's going to do its job as a tactical blade. It's going to go into material. It's not going to deform too easily. It's not the thickest tip out there towards the end, but it's still got a little bit of meat. It's still got a little bit of reinforcement there. So it is a decently stabby blade, but it's got a lot of belly, a lot of sweeping belly on that design, a decent amount of kind of flat. There isn't actually a whole lot of flat on this blade. I wish there was more, but it is kind of just that little bit of radius contour, which makes for a nice slash cut. Again, kind of what this knife is designed for. This is a tactical folder. And they're just going hard at that. Look at the hardware in this thing. Look at the size of the hardware to actually hold that inset liner lock in place, right? It's just massive. This is a Torx 20 head on the pivot. Torx 20, that's ridiculous. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of contact. 7 if you're including the pivot. That's 6 points of positive contact in the fastening of this knife together. I mean, that's just freaking ridiculous. One of them is actually just to hold the blade stop in. I don't know if I can actually get this to come across. You can see that blade stop in there. Hold on, let me pull a little flashlight out of my pocket. The blade stop in here, because this knife comes in 2 models. You can get the manual action, or you can actually get an automatic version. And so that blade stop right there, you see it? It's just this big, massive thing in the back there, and it's kind of textured. It's got a little bit of flair, and it's got a design to it. It's radiused, it's all cool looking. And you can only see that when you actually look down inside the channel of this knife. And that's just a really neat little effect in there. But what I think that's there for is that's the area for the actual button. For the actual button, if this were the automatic version, it would have a hole in the scale here, and it just makes it easier to use that really large, giant diameter closure stop pin in the, in the manufacturing of this knife. And so they give it a little bit of flair, you know what I mean? They don't make it boring. It's cool looking. It's got a little bit of design aspect to that. That's just really neat. And I don't know what this lock bar is made out of, because it is an inset liner lock. You can see that it's bolted into the side of the frame here, but I don't know what it is, because it's got a, where's this little flashlight? Pull this thing back out again. It's got a lock bar insert. You can see that there's a removable steel lock bar insert on there. This is an LFO2 from Mech Army, if you're wondering, titanium LFO2 on the flashlight. But it's got a steel lock bar insert in there, which suggests to me that this would be made out of titanium, because why are you going to put a steel lock bar insert on a removable part? Because this is, if it was the frame, I can see it, because, the steel on the lock bar would still wear down, and instead of replacing the whole side scale, you could still just replace that little insert. But that whole locking bar is replaceable. And so why would you put a steel lock face in a steel lock bar when the entire lock bar is replaceable, unless that lock bar isn't steel and it's actually made out of titanium? That lock bar is actually titanium, and that's why they put a steel lock face in there to actually interface with the blade. I don't know if that's true, but I think that may be the case, and as well with the weight of this knife, because this thing is so freaking blade heavy, it's ridiculous. You can see it is tip down carry, and so even the fasteners, all of the weight for the pocket clip, everything, I'm going to get into that in a second, but all of the weight, everything for the pocket clip is all sitting way out front of this knife. As thick as that blade is here, there isn't a whole lot of aluminum in the back of this knife. There isn't a whole lot of weight back there, so it's just like front heavy, it's blade heavy as shit, and there's a lot of different things that contribute to that, not just being one of them. This pocket clip, honestly, the best pocket clip I've ever experienced in my life. It is tip down carry, which does suck. I've gotten used to it. It's not a killer for me. It is for a lot of people, but look how low it sits. Look how flat this thing is, right? Because the overall design of this knife, just the way that it's shaped, the way that it sits in your hand, if it were to actually be tip up carry, then it just wouldn't feel as good. You'd have this pocket clip sticking off here, it being smaller, and my hand being able to wrap around, and my pinky being able to wrap around the back of this knife and not have that pocket clip in the way. Just having it smooth there is it's comfortable. It feels really nice, and especially with as fat and as big as this thing flares out to be up at the top, having it shrink down, it narrows the whole profile of the knife, right? Because if you had that pocket clip on the side, it would bump it up, and so you wouldn't get that narrowing of the profile aspect in the way that it feels in your hand. And how low it is, it comes so close to the actual scale, so when I'm gripping this knife, it basically disappears. I have to think about that pocket clip to actually be able to feel it. It's just excellent. I love the way that that's done. This little protrusion here, the way that it pops up, is the only thing that I can actually feel in the grip that doesn't feel like it's just supposed to be there. It's done so well. And then the way that I'm just gushing on this pocket clip, guys. I'm gonna keep going. The way that it's so close, because it is so flat that they've done that, this little dip right here that's in a lot of Microtech pocket clips. But when I put this thing on my pocket, I don't feel that. I only feel one lump. It goes over and then it sits into my pocket. It's the same thing with this thing here. It just feels exactly like this clip here. I get over the one lump and then it goes down into my pocket. There isn't the same transition here because this has two. I feel it pop over this and then I have to pop over this. There's two positive engagements when I actually slip this thing into my pocket, and so it just gives that little bit of extra added security, as well as the way that this thing is sweeping off to the side, right? It has to actually make it around the pivot the way that that thing is designed, and so when it's sitting in my pocket, right, you can imagine it's sitting up against the side of my pocket. And so this is all the way to the edge of my pocket, and the pocket clip is just hanging a little bit over, which makes it a really nice to carry because it doesn't move. It is very secure in place, but at the same time, it just looks really cool. It looks good hanging out of my pocket. I really like that because there's so much knife. There's so much knife, and it's this big shiny spot, and there's so much crap sticking out of the top of my pocket. Carry this knife. I think it just looks excellent, especially with the little Microtech logo on there, because again, I'm carrying a manual action Microtech. I think that's a pretty damn cool fact. I really like that. The ergonomics of this knife are excellent. The jimping actually is just is great too, right? I'm gonna keep gushing on this knife because no matter where my finger falls, if it falls on the side, if it falls on this side, if I catch the tip, because it is so wide, there's so much surface area here for that jimping. It just works. No matter where my finger falls or how it gets on there, it just fits in all of the right areas. And then on the top of the blade as well, there's this little spot of jimping here, which if you're trying to use it like this, is just uncomfortable. It doesn't work, and you're still sliding forward because any sort of pressure you push forward, you're sliding forward. It's in a downward motion there. That's not there for that. That's in for a pulling motion. So you've actually got jimping on the back of the knife for any sort of pull cut motion you have to do. You've got a lot of just pressure to pull this knife back, to actually secure it in your hand on the retracting motion, because you can see there isn't a whole lot to actually hold you on. That's a negative. That is a negative on this knife, is there isn't a whole lot to hold you on as far as slipping off of the end of this blade besides the jimping. And having that little bit of rest there on a serious retracting motion or pull cut is really nice. So that is actually excellently placed. And it took me a little bit of while in use playing with this knife to actually figure out that that's really good, because initially I was like, why is that even there? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I really like that. What I meant by fit and finish, right? Let me get into that. The fit and finish, right? The fit of this knife is excellent, right? There's a couple of gripes. I'll get into what those are, but you can see the seams here. You can't see any light. There's no space through all of these seams. It matches up. One of the flaws is you can kind of see in the glass breaker here, the way that this glass breaker is just set in there. It's just kind of pinched into the actual frame of the knife, and you can kind of see it. I don't know if it'll come across there. Pull out this little flashlight once again, and I don't know if you can kind of see in there, it's not perfectly centered, and so that is a little bit of a negative in the actual fit. But other than that, the actual lock bar itself, you can see you've got full length. There's full length, full contact of that actual lock bar. And so it's not sitting off, It's not a canted engagement between the lock bar and the knife. The full length of that lock bar is actually making contact with the tang of this knife. And so it's a very secure lockup, and as well it gives you added longevity, because there's more material that has to wear down over time to wear that lockout. And so having that full contact there it's a nice thing. It's more secure, and it adds to the longevity of the knife. As well, you can see that the contact here for the blade stop, right, there's basically, it's full wear. There's no singular spot that's more worn that takes actual impact. Because every time I open this, those thumb studs are coming around and slamming into that aluminum right there. And so every time I do that, there's no deformation. There's no deformation on any singular area. It's very even, and so there's a full seating. It's a full even contact when it actually slams into the aluminum. Again, that's a fit issue that's just excellent. Now let's get into finish, right? Finish comes into things like this, right? Because you can see the track here for these little millings, how it's not finished there, and it comes out, and all three of these lines continue on and then are scratched into the top of the aluminum there. There's that little bit of raised area that just none of that should be there. And then this as well, there's this little lump right here that's this big, you see the transitions here? This side is lower, this side is higher, but on this side is lower, and this side is higher. And it continues all the way down. It's just crappy milling. It was just not finished well. The outside of this knife does not have a very good finish. You can see over here, this looks like something crashed into it in the CNC machine. That looks like a drill actually crashed into the scale there. It's just beat up. There's these marks and just finish issues all over this knife. I'm surprised this was not a factory second. I bought this from Weeby Knives on Pier 39 in San Francisco. Excellent knife store, by the way. Check them out. This is just, that is finish. That's a horrible finish on a knife that is excellently fitted. And yeah, I think this is an excellent example of the differences between those two, because it fails at one so horribly, but it excels so good at the other. This is an awesome knife. I definitely like it. I find myself carrying this thing around quite a bit. It's running into that tactical zone when I'm feeling more of a tactical knife. I want something a little bit faster that comes out like a rocket. This thing still feels like an automatic, even though it is a manual action folder. This is just kind of one of those things that I gravitate towards. I definitely like it. The 7075 over, this is 7075 T6 aluminum. It's not 6061 T6 aluminum, which is a major upgrade. 6061 aluminum is more easily, it's easier to weld, it's easier to mill, it's easier to work with, it's more corrosion resistant than the 7075, which this is here. But the 7075 has a much higher tensile strength, it's got a much higher impact strength, it's not nearly as chemically resistant, so the black coating on this is kind of necessary, but it is a serious upgrade in the tensile strength and the durability of the actual aluminum itself. And so that's a really cool thing that they did, the switch to 7075 T6 over 6061 T6 aluminum, which is just kind of a standard in the knife industry now. So that was a serious upgrade as well. Yeah, that's it. I'm done gushing about this thing. Put a date on it, 5/18. How cool is that? I still love that they serial number their knives. It's a Microtech Socom Elite. Y'all have a good one.